The morning sun burned across the desert base, spreading gold across the sand and turning the air sharp with dust and sweat. The recruits lined up on the parade ground, faces stiff, backs straight, all waiting for the sergeant's bark. Trucks rolled by, kicking up clouds. Among the line of green uniforms, one new figure stood out, a woman, small-framed, calm eyes, her hair tied back neat beneath her cap. The others stole glances, some curious, some smirking. Her name was Arya Locke, and they thought she was just another charity case sent to fail. The sergeant paced the line, boots heavy, voice cutting the air like a whip. He called for volunteers to lead the first drill, a timed endurance run, full pack, obstacle course, no mercy. Nobody stepped forward. Then Arya did. The men around her groaned. One whispered that she wouldn't make it past the first wall. Another said she'd slow the whole platoon down. The sergeant said nothing at first, just gave her a look like a warning. Then he grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble, and ordered her to take point. The whistle blew. They ran. Dust rose in a storm of boots. The first wall came quick, splintered wood and rope. Arya hit it running. The men slowed, expecting her to stop, to fumble. Instead, she climbed it fast, smooth, like she'd done it 1,000 times. She dropped down on the other side before they reached the top. The next obstacle was the barbed wire crawl. They threw themselves into the dirt, elbows scraping, lungs burning. Arya kept low, fast as a lizard in heat, her face streaked with dust but steady. One man tried to race her, but halfway through he snagged his sleeve and cursed. She didn't look back. When they hit the trench, she jumped in without hesitation, pulling herself up the other side with a single motion. By the time the rest caught up, she was halfway across the open field. The sergeant shouted at the others, his voice echoing over the field. But even he couldn't hide the surprise in his tone. The men pushed harder, not wanting to be beaten by the new recruit. At the finish line, she waited, breathing steady, barely sweating. The stopwatch clicked. She had finished the full course nearly 2 minutes ahead of the fastest recorded time that month. The others arrived panting, some collapsing, some glaring. The sergeant walked over, eyes narrowing, his voice low enough for only her to hear. He told her she had luck, but luck doesn't last. She only nodded, her expression unreadable. The next drill was weapons assembly and disassembly, done under pressure, time ticking down, parts laid out on tables under the burning sun. Most recruits took 5-6 minutes to finish one round. Arya finished in 2. Her hands moved like she was reading music. Every click, every slide was exact. The sergeant said nothing this time. He just looked at her hands, then at her eyes, and moved on. By lunch, the jokes had stopped. The recruits, who had laughed that morning, were quiet now, watching her from a distance as she ate alone. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Afternoon brought combat drills, pair-ups for hand-to-hand sparring. When the sergeant called her name, he paired her with a tall recruit named Briggs, 6'2", all muscle and arrogance. He laughed as he faced her, said he'd go easy. The whistle blew, and in seconds Briggs was flat on the ground, his breath knocked clean out. The sergeant barked for a rematch. It ended the same way. The third time, she pinned him hard enough to make the dirt fly. The laughter around the ring died. The only sound was the wind scraping across the training yard. She stepped back, offered him a hand, but Briggs didn't take it. He looked away, embarrassed. The sergeant called a halt and told everyone to take 5. But nobody moved. They just stared at her as if trying to figure out who she was. That night in the barracks, whispers ran through the bunks. Some said she'd been special forces. Some said she came from a military family. Others thought she was planted there to test them. She didn't confirm or deny anything. She cleaned her boots, folded her uniform, and wrote something short in a notebook before lights out. The next morning brought a new challenge, the endurance march. 40 pounds on their backs, 20 miles through the desert, sun like fire, wind cutting at their eyes. Recruits began falling behind by the 5th mile. Arya didn't. She kept pace, eyes forward, her breathing even. When the wind kicked up and visibility dropped, She moved faster, leading them through the storm. By the 10th mile, half the unit was straggling. The sergeant shouted at them to move, but it was Arya who went back, lifted the pack of a fallen recruit, and told him to keep walking. She carried part of his load and still stayed in front. At the checkpoint, when they finally stopped, the medic counted pulses, handed out water, told them to rest. Arya sat off to the side, still calm, watching the horizon. The sergeant came over, his shadow long against the sand. He asked her where she learned to push like that. She said she learned it when she had to, when no one believed she could. Then she stood, saluted, and asked for the next drill. The final test of the week was a live fire simulation, tactical movement through mock buildings, targets in the shadows, alarms blaring. Precision, speed, and judgment mattered more than strength. Most recruits tensed up under the noise, the chaos, the weight of the rifle. Arya moved through the course like a ghost, silent and sure. Every shot hit center mass. Every movement was calculated. When she reached the last corner, she noticed one of the recruits froze under fire, panic locking his body. Without hesitation, she stepped into the open, drew the incoming fire toward herself, gave him cover to retreat. When it was over, the instructor stopped the timer early. Nobody spoke. The air was filled with gunpowder and disbelief. Back in the yard, the sergeant called everyone to attention. He said recruits like her didn't come often. Then he told them something none expected, that she'd been a last-minute transfer, her file incomplete, no prior record. He admitted even he'd thought she wouldn't last a day, but she had done more than last. She had set records. Later, when the sun dropped behind the ridges, painting everything red and gold, the recruits gathered outside the mess hall. Briggs, the one she had floored on the mat, walked up to her. He didn't have that smirk anymore. He said the unit owed her respect. He offered her a place at their table. For the first time, she smiled, small but real. As days turned to weeks, her legend spread across the base. Instructors began using her as a benchmark. New recruits whispered her name before dawn drills. When she led runs, no one complained. They followed. Even the sergeants started calling her Locke, no title, just the kind of name that meant you'd earned your place. During the final review, when the commanding officer came down from headquarters to inspect the platoon, Arya stood at the front row. The officer read from a clipboard, paused and looked at her. He asked how long she'd served before this. She said this was her first posting. He frowned, then asked where she learned discipline like that. She said discipline was what kept her alive long before uniforms or ranks ever did. After inspection, the officer pulled the sergeant aside. No one heard what he said, but by the time the platoon was dismissed, orders had come down that she was being promoted early, assigned to lead a new mixed training unit. It was unheard of for a first-cycle recruit. The others didn't question it. They'd seen what she could do. On her last day at that base, she packed her things quietly. The sun was just coming up again. Same golden heat, same wind. The recruits lined up without being told, forming a line on either side of the yard. As she walked through, every one of them saluted. Briggs broke formation long enough to hand her a patch from their platoon flag, a symbol of respect. She took it, nodded, and walked on. When she reached the truck waiting at the gate, she paused and looked back at the rows of faces, the same men who had doubted her, laughed at her, underestimated her. Now they stood tall because of her. She climbed into the truck, the engine roared, and dust rose behind her as she left. Weeks later, a new batch of recruits arrived. They gathered in the yard, fresh uniforms, nervous faces. The sergeant looked at them the way he always did, like he already knew who would break. But then he stopped, turned to the training board where the week's schedule was pinned. At the top, a name had been added in fresh ink. Instructor, Lieutenant Arya Locke. The recruits whispered, not knowing who she was yet. But the veterans smiled. They knew. They knew that the woman everyone once thought would fail had become the standard every soldier now tried to reach. In the training compound beyond the yard, footsteps echoed, steady, controlled, strong. She entered the field again, the same calm eyes, the same unshakable composure. The sergeant saluted her, sharp and proud. She returned it. Then she blew the whistle and the drills began again. The sound of boots and breath and effort filling the air, all under the command of the one they'd once thought was an easy recruit, the one who had proven that strength isn't shown in muscle or noise but in the quiet fire that never goes out.